Which celebrity went on the fastest, hardest and most destructive downward spiral from their peak? Ezra Miller is doing a speedrun on this ATM. Kevin Spacey getting revealed to be a predator, using his sexuality as an excuse, getting fired from his projects and then posting an insane super-villain level YouTube video as Frank Underwood basically blaming the viewers for being complicit. Mark Salling. The guy who played Puck in Glee. Maybe not the biggest star. But he was a fan favorite on a huge show. Got caught with child pornography, pleaded guilty, then hung himself. That's a pretty hard downward spiral. His crimes even retroactively ruined his character on Glee. They made a lot of jokes about Puck being creepy, which aged well. Wasn't there a literal episode subplot where he and another character were going to make a sex tape until they were told it would be illegal since they were underage? Jared Fogle, the subway guy. The things discovered about him are quite disturbing. Prison is an appropriate place for him. If I remember correctly, the person who got the authorities involved was some woman working on set who Jared just casually revealed his predilections to. It's like he thought his subway fame would shield him from the law. I think of Chris Farley. His SNL career started in '92. His real break came with Tommy Boy in '94. Dead by '98 at 33 years old. Horribly addicted to drugs, alcohol, food, and other impulse-related stuff probably. Probably gained 100 pounds in his 6-year run. OD'd on a speedball, as everyone seems to. Everybody of that era claims he was the funniest guy they've ever known, and most of them talk about being frustrated both by his lack of any self-worth, despite how beloved he was, and a feeling of inevitability about his early demise. Obviously Chris wasn't destructive like some of the other scumbags mentioned on this thing. He was simply self-destructive. People like to compare him to John Belushi. They had pretty much the same self-destructive trajectories, both fat dudes, both highly energetic performers. But as people I think they were very different. I think he's more comparable to Robin Williams. They both had this insatiable need to make people laugh, and they both had this superhuman energy. By all accounts Chris, like Robin, was an incredibly sweet and sensitive person in private life. Apparently had spent a lot of time volunteering at children's hospitals in Madison, Wisconsin, and he didn't even talk about it. I've heard a million takes on Farley, and it's always heartbreaking, and telling that 25 years later, people still talk about it and can't get over it. Armie Hammer. And apparently Ezra Miller is just batshit. Tila Tequila going from bisexual reality TV vixen to Nazi was pretty astonishing. In the same thread, Wynn suggested her hatred of Jews was so intense that she would be willing to die on behalf of a second Holocaust. There are only two things in this world, for which I would gladly sacrifice my own life: the destruction of all Jews and the preservation of the white race. Ah. Does she know she's not white? She had some sort of massive head trauma between when she got famous and when she really went off the rails. Yep. Brain aneurysm in 2012 from a drug overdose. White powder. John Wilkes Booth. This has got to be the top. No other actor has fallen so much after they literally killed the president and became the most wanted man in the country. A quote from British sitcom Only Fools and Horses, Gandhi: he had one great movie then nothing. Have you never seen Gandhi 2? I mean, Oscar Pistorius was a pretty sharp fall from Paralympian champion role model to spouse murderer. The Onion had two major takes on this and were both quite solid. Double amputee proves he is capable of anything, and Report, World now down to 5 stories that are inspirational. I believe it was All Things Considered that did a really good piece on how Pistorius may have never been particularly inspirational to begin with. The height of a double amputee's prosthetics are determined by calculations that aren't necessarily super precise, unlike single amputees where you make the prosthetic as long as the remaining legend of measurement. There's pretty good evidence that the only reason Pistorius started winning races is because he had his prosthetic length reconsidered upwards a couple inches, which is a huge advantage since you get a much longer stride without the added weight that you would get if your legs suddenly got longer. He went from not qualifying to winning in about a month. At the time there weren't enough double amputees in the Paralympics to have their own races, so Pistorius was running almost exclusively against single amputee runners who couldn't reconsider their heights. Edit looks like what I heard was one of the NPR news shows presenting reporting on Blade Runner, The first episode of this podcast, so I'm not totally sure it's the same thing, but looks like it covers the same stuff and was the source of the interviews with Pistorius's rivals that I did here explaining the prosthetics length's advantage. I remember when the controversy started over the fairness of his miracle legs. Anyone bringing it up was treated as if they were the reason he lost his legs. Chris Benoit. I may not be a wrestling fan anymore, but damn, what a tragedy. No one can truly comprehend how wild that night was. They were doing a live tribute show the same time the news came out that he committed the double murder-suicide. It's interesting to see in hindsight that some of the wrestlers had an inkling that he could be responsible. Regal is the most prominent. Apparently JBL said something like, "You don't think he did it, do ya?" And Regal thought that, duck, he might have. So all his bits talking about Benoit are about his work as a wrestler, rather than as a person, because Hess realized that he might have murdered his entire family. I think Regal revealed recently that his wife had banned Benoit from visiting their house, because she had a bad feeling about him. Bill Cosby. He was America's favorite dad, stand-up comic, had several very successful TV shows, spokesman at colleges, then poof. He's just a dirty, creepy guy who spikes your drink so he can get some. To be fair, that wasn't a downward spiral as in a quick shift in his behavior. He had been doing it for years and decades and only now got found out and prosecuted. It was one of those open secrets similar to Harvey Weinstein, unfortunately. People knew, they just didn't act on it until the public raised awareness. Ian Watkins went from frontman of a world-famous rock band to doing 30 years for child sex offenses. According to Vice, when GCHQ was called in to help the police access encrypted files on Watkins' computer, they found that one of the passwords he'd used was, "I fuck kids." Man had zero shame whatsoever. The whole Megalols thing doesn't help it either. He even had his sentence extended because while already in prison he was found to be trying to groom a young woman into abusing her child. AlisonMacN.wikipedia.org. Oh yeah, the other day I was talking to a friend about Smallville for whatever reason. We Googled her to find out why we really hadn't seen her around, and oh boy. For those who don't know, she was part of a sex slave cult. Also, fun fact, a bunch of Mexican politicians were also involved in that same cult. Not just a sex slave cult, one where they branded the women like cattle with the guru's initials on their pelvis. Where the first generation of the cult had it done willingly, by a professional body mod artist that was nowhere near as painful or risky as the amateur brands done to later generations of less willing cult victims. And used those brands and the pain suffered as points to shame and belittle their victims. T.J. Miller. Called a bomb threat on a train he was on when he was rejected by someone he was trying to flirt with. I remember when he had a meltdown on Twitter over people's reactions to the Emoji Movie. That is not the hill you want to die on, the defending Emoji Movie part. Aaron Hernandez. Played tight end for the New England Patriots. Fresh off a new contract. Killed his friend, found guilty, then took his own life during the appeal. Pretty sure taking his life was meant to secure a payday for his family, as they would have been entitled to his earnings once he filed his appeal. It didn't even work. He died innocent, technically, due to an outdated legal principle. Then they rightfully reversed it and reinstated his conviction. The Supreme Judicial Court unanimously found that the legal rule that erased Hernandez's conviction is outdated and no longer consonant with the circumstances of contemporary life. It ordered that Hernandez's conviction be restored and that the practice be abolished for future cases. The ruling does not affect past cases. Yet Kenneth Lay of Enron fame, the guy who was the CEO and chairman, did exactly this, and his family got to keep all of his money. Many believe he faked it and is still alive. Edit. Also, Chesapeake Energy CEO Aubrey McClendon got away with keeping his fortune by dying in a car crash after indicted. Gia Karangi. She started modeling in 1978 at age 18. Reached her peak in 1979 and was considered the supermodel. But by 1980 her career was already in steep decline due to her hardcore drug addiction alongside her erratic personality, making her a difficulty to work with. By 1981 her career was basically over at only age 21. She tried to make multiple comebacks but it never stuck and officially left the modeling industry for good in 1983. She ended up working as a store clerk and even a prostitute for some time, but in 1986 she ended up dying of AIDS at age 26, suspected to be caused by contaminated heroin needles. She was in such poor condition when she died that when the doctors picked her up the skin fell off her back. No one in the fashion industry attended her funeral or even knew she had died. She fell just as quickly as she rose. In the end, no one she thought cared about her in New York ended up being there for her during her final months except for the friends she made in rehab. Though through the demise of Gia brought about the rise of Cindy Crawford. Cindy and Gia share a lot of resemblance, so many photographers would use her in place of Gia because she was far easier to work with. She was even nicknamed Baby Gia at the beginning of her career. First time I ever saw Angelina Jolie was in the HBO movie Gia on HBO, about Gia Kurang.